All right, guys. Stream is coming online. Welcome, everybody. Just getting us started here. I'm so excited for today. Excited for what we have to talk about. We're going to let the stream kind of fire up. We're getting started. Welcome to week 1 of Seeking Shalom. This is our chapter by chapter Bible study of God's redemptive plan for the world. Every Friday, we're diving into the biblical narrative of our past, present, and future, discussing where Jesus is leading his church in the days ahead, and the fulfillment of the Great Commission. So this is going to be super fun. We've got some great chapters to talk about today. As we get started, I do want to let everybody know that I have some notes. I'm going to give a quick overview of a few chapters that we've picked out just to talk about this morning. And if you want to follow along, you can sign up for a free account on our website, Servant Leader Network, or download the app, Servant Leader Network app. And all my notes, everything that I share in the stream, all of that is available for you for free. You can download it, reuse it. It's fully yours. None of it is copywritten or anything crazy like that. So I want you guys to know that it's there, because as I talk through some things, some of it may not show up on the stream, super perfectly or anything like that, but it's all available for you to download. So here at the beginning, I just want to make sure everybody knows, go to our website for Servant Leader Network, servantleadernetwork.org, or download the app, even better, Servant Leader Network app on your phone, and you sign up for free, and then you can follow along. All of the recordings of these streams and all the notes for all the chapters we're going to go through are all available for you for free. You can download them, you can follow along, you can watch the recordings, you can download the audio, whatever you want to do. We're just trying to put it all together in one place so that everybody can have access to every bit of what we're going to be talking about. So I'm excited. I'm going to share some notes with you on the screen, but you can have them for yourself. And of course, highly recommend have your Bible. Open up your Bible app on your phone, bring your Bible, open it up, whatever you want to do. I think we got some really encouraging stuff to talk about today, and I'm going to try to move pretty quickly. So that's why I want to make sure you know those notes are available for you. If you feel like I'm moving too quickly, that's okay. The notes are there for you to go back and do some deeper study. Anyway, that's why I put that there for you. So today, we're going to look at something I wanted to talk about, probably should have talked about last week. I wasn't quite ready. So I want to just give a little bit of an overview of the covenant foundations of God's redemptive plan. This totally should have been in the original week 0, because we've got a lot of things just to cover about the foundations of the covenant. Then we're going to jump into some chapter by chapter that will really be kind of our week 1 material. So we're going to look at, once we get through the covenant foundations, we'll look at Leviticus 26, Numbers 23 and 24, and then Deuteronomy 28 through 32. These are some of the most referenced passages of all biblical prophecy, of all the Bible. So many of God's promises for, whether it's Israel or the Great Commission or the redemption of the world, they find their main references in these original covenant chapters. That's why I want to start with that, because these promises go back thousands of years, well before my nation, many of your nations, all the way back to really the Garden of Eden. We'll take a look at that here in just a second. After the chapter and chapter overview, after the covenant overview and chapter overview, I am hosting a discussion group. So even though we're here on the live stream, and I like to try to follow along if anybody makes a comment, I should have a way to see the chat. I have never confirmed if the chat actually works. So you're welcome to chat if you want. And if I see it, if my software is working, I'll try to follow along. But hello. Anyway, after we get through some of the overview I'm going to do here on the stream, I'm moving to a discussion group. I host a discussion group in the Servant Leader Network app where we get to talk about these things. We get to ask questions. We get to discuss where we see these chapters and God's redemptive plan unfolding in current events, and explore how we can build with continuity with where Jesus is leading his church in the future. Seeking Shalom is made possible by the prayers and support of our ministry partners. So anybody can sign up for that. There's no donation required. That discussion group is really for those ministry partners. So if you don't see it in the app, that might be why. We got to add you to that list of ministry partners. Anybody can sign up. There's no donation required. just reach out to me or go visit our website. You can be added to that ministry partner discussion group. All right, here we are. My time, it's 11:03. I'm going to go ahead and pull up covenant foundations, kind of the first bit that I want to look at with you. I'm going to try to move through this kind of quickly, but I do have everything in the notes for you. I want to make sure that you're able to get the notes. And so if you feel like I'm moving too quickly, I understand. It's all right. But that's part of it. Which one? There we go. All righty. Now we've got the notes on screen, and I've got them in front of me as well. One of the most amazing things about the way that God begins to introduce his redemptive plan into the world, it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. We can learn a lot about God's intention, his redemptive plan, by looking back to the creation account, what humanity was originally intended to exist like. Genesis 1:26 and 28 kind of reveals a bit of that, and I've included that there in notes. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens and the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image, the image of God. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over essentially all creation. What's beautiful about what's revealed here is not just that God created human beings in his likeness, but that he created us with a purpose of shared dominion over creation. The shared purpose did come with a qualifier, though, that we're not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is also there in the Garden of Eden. But we find the first mentions of God's redemptive plan at the very onset of sin in Genesis chapter 3. I've included this in the notes as well. God communicated his intention to restore every consequence of sin as soon as sin entered the story. The Bible intentionally describes the very end of the story from the beginning. And interestingly, the first mention of God's redemptive plan actually was directed to Satan himself. You can see I'm going to scroll up just to bring that up a little bit. Listen to what God said to Satan. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring. She will bruise your head and you will bruise his heel. Now, my ESV translation, I put this in the notes, it says that the children of Eve will bruise your head, but the Hebrew is often translated as crush your skull. And more precisely, kind of the picture that the Hebrew is giving is that she will have the ultimate control of your end. Remarkably, one of the first descriptions of the people of God's promise is that we would be skull crushers through Eve's descendants. Many of the messianic promises that we'll look at actually relate to this skull crushing promise. It's very, very interesting. All right, quickly want to look at then the covenant foundations. God's promises of redemption continued through the divine appointment of a specific family lineage. The earliest mentions of the salvation of the nations and the reconciliation of humanity to God find their roots in God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. These promises were where God began to define the terms of his redemptive plan of the earth's restoration, to initiate his redemptive plan for the nations through the family of Abraham. And I'm going to take a look at some of these. Again, I'm going to try to move kind of quickly. I might skip over some, but I've included many of these accounts through. I mean, if you want to have some fun, you just need to open your Bible, read Genesis 12 through 17 and 18, get into the book of Genesis and look at some of these covenant passages because the story is really fascinating. I don't have time to go into all of it today. One day I'm sure we will, but we would be here all day. But just quickly, God makes a promise to Abraham in Genesis 12. He says that in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Through this lineage, all the families of the earth will be blessed. I want to jump to Genesis 17. Look at the way that when God renames Abraham, the way that he defines this covenant that he's making, he says, I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant. Everlasting covenant. I've highlighted that because that's very important. To be God to you and to your offspring after you, and I will give you and to your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession. Again, Genesis 17 is pretty emphatic. Everlasting possession. And I will be their God. Speaking generationally into Abraham's descendants. Again, the covenant proceeds through Isaac. You have the Isaac and Ishmael siblinghood, but look at what he says about Isaac. He says, you will call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant through him, Isaac, as an everlasting covenant. Again, everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. Again, in Genesis 18, God reiterates to Abraham, I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him. Or I just read that. All the nations of the earth will be blessed in him. That's what I'm trying to say. When Abraham's about to sacrifice Isaac, Genesis 22, and in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. To Isaac, he says, in your offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. To Jacob, he says, in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. We're just tracing this covenant generationally through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We'll come back later to the reconciliation of Jacob and Esau. We can look at that more in a future week because that is relevant for God's redemptive plan. Actually, the story of Jacob and Esau, super fascinating. The way that it turns out, they really do reconcile in the end, which is awesome. Jacob is blessed and renamed Israel, and God says, I will give you the land. I will give the land to your offspring after you. And then we're going to jump ahead to Moses. A beautiful thing happens at Mount Sinai with Moses as Israel has come out of Egypt. Again, just to track kind of the generations. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but you've got Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. You've got Jacob's sons. Jacob is renamed Israel, but you've got Jacob's sons, which become the 12 tribes of Israel. But first, they are taken into Egypt. Remember, Joseph gets sold into slavery in Egypt. And there's a big famine, and eventually all of Joseph's family migrate. They move to Egypt, where they're fed and housed. Eventually, they're taken into slavery in Egypt. Then you have Moses, who delivers them from Egypt. Now they're out in the wilderness. They're at Mount Sinai, and God is again reiterating his covenant, really he's inviting Israel as a nation into betrothal for this covenant that he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And again, he's going to say similar things, but I'll just pull it up real quick in the notes. And he took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of all the people. This is Moses reading the covenant to all the people. And look at how the people respond. They say, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the book of the people and said, behold, the blood of the covenant of the Lord has made with you in accordance with these words. And there's this kind of ceremony that they go through that is a betrothal of Israel as a people to God. And even later, God and Moses reiterate the covenant again when there's the whole golden calf incident. The covenant gets renewed again there. So again, continuing further into the law of Moses, God repeatedly defines the cup of his blessing when the covenant is fulfilled and the cup of his wrath when there's rebellion against the covenant. We're going to look at some of those passages here today in Leviticus and Numbers and in Deuteronomy. But in the cup of his blessing, God's promises to Israel are fulfilled, and Israel is prosperous and exalted. And so God's blessing to the earth and to Israel are becoming an inseparable reality, that Israel is really deeply involved in God's redemptive plan, not just for one people and one nation, but for all the nations. That's a little bit of the covenant foundations I wanted to touch on. And there's very specific, we'll come back to this later because there's many prophecies to the the rest of biblical prophecy that come back and reference the original promises of the land borders for Israel. And I've included those references there. I'm not going to get into them today, but we will come back to them later because, again, many biblical promises reference God's going to restore the original borders of not just Israel, but of many nations. You can see some of them there. Very interesting. All right. I do want to just point out there's some Bible teachers that suggest that Israel has historically experienced the final fulfillment of God's covenant and that there should be no further expectation for the fulfillment of God's covenant with Israel. And they reference often Joshua 21 and Joshua 23. And again, those are pretty remarkable descriptions of the fulfillment of God's covenant in their day. But that doesn't mean that there's no future fulfillment. It's a little bit of a assumption to say that was the final fulfillment and that seals it for history and there's no more relevance of God's covenant with Israel. It kind of that begins to face contradiction when you progress just down your page in the Bible from chapter 23 to chapter 24, and Joshua leads Israel in renewing the covenant again. It wouldn't make any sense if God's covenant with Israel was finished and then he says again, now let's renew again. That would be contradictory. Also, I love to reference Psalm 105. Look at what's described here in Psalm 105 about God's covenant with Israel. It very closely resembles the way that God talked about the covenant in Genesis 17, which we looked at earlier. He says, He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in the earth. He remembers his covenant forever. Which covenant? The word that he commanded for 1,000 generations. Which word? The covenant that he made with Abraham. His sworn promise to Isaac, which he confirmed to Jacob as a statute, to Israel when Jacob was renamed, as an everlasting covenant. We just looked at those references back in Genesis. We put all this together into this one set of notes so that it's easy to grab a hold to. All right, we're going to skip through understanding biblical prophetic fulfillment. That's there in the notes for you for later. I'm going to switch it up to another piece of notes. That's going to be the end of our little section on just the foundation of biblical covenants. I'm going to jump now to Leviticus 26. And I'm going to just show you that I do have notes for that. This is what the notes look like. You can go on Servant Leader Network. You can download these and it kind of breaks it down for you in a little bit more of an outline. But what I actually want to pull up is just the text itself so that we can reference it together. How are we doing, everybody? I need to take a drink. All right, so Leviticus 26, very similar to Deuteronomy 28, Deuteronomy 29. Some of those passages we're going to look at in a moment where Moses is really clearly outlining the blessings of the covenant and the consequences of disobedience. I like to reference these. These are later referred to by Hebrew prophets as the cup of God's blessing and the cup of God's wrath. Again, it's covenant blessings and covenant rebellion, consequences. And maybe consequences it would be better said as discipline. It's not just consequences that are punitive, but it's discipline that's calling Israel back to the covenant. And so I want to just reference this here before we jump into the actual text. Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26, they outline, it's like a covenant feedback system where Israel obeys the covenant, then they experience the cup of God's blessing. But if Israel disobeys or rebels against the covenant, then they experience not just consequences, but divine discipline. That is an appeal for reconciliation and redemption. It's not just punitive, but it's an invitation to return to the covenant and receive the cup of God's blessing. In Israel's case, God's discipline is a signal that's interpreted as an appeal to return to the covenant. That signal intensity can escalate if God's appeals go ignored or unanswered. It's almost having a missed call from God or missing your alarm. You're sleeping through the alarm. I know that's happened to me. I know it certainly happens to all of us. But occasionally Israel would ignore God's appeals and then they would suffer greater consequences until eventually they'd notice look down at their phone and they've got a dozen missed calls. Finally, the alarm signal is getting through. But far worse than that would be not receiving that feedback at all. When that disciplinary feedback goes silent is actually one of the scariest places to be, because then the restraint of your sin and your propensity for destruction really is unlimited. Silent mode, when God's feedback goes silent, is a notable characteristic of the end of the age, as sin is permitted to escalate drastically. But the primary threat to Israel in Leviticus 26 and in Deuteronomy 28, it's not an existential nation. It's not an existential threat of any kind, or even Satan who's opposing Israel. In these chapters, the threat is their rebellion against the covenant, and it's God himself who is withstanding Israel to invite them and call them back into reconciliation and right relationship. We see this throughout Leviticus 26. And let's see a couple things I want to highlight. Deuteronomy 28 is they're kind of sister and brother passages, just like that. All right, one second. As I find my place. A couple of examples of some blessing that you see if you were to just take a look. Let me pull up so I can control where the Bible's at. Beautiful things. You will keep my Sabbaths, and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. If you walk in my statutes and observe my commandments and do them, then there's all these blessings that God pronounces. There's agricultural fertility. Let me scroll up so you can see verses 4 and 5. There's existential peace, geopolitical peace, the removal of harmful beasts even. There's supernatural military might. You'll chase your enemies and they will fall before you. 5 of you will chase 100. And 100 of you will chase 10,000. Your enemies will fall before you by the sword. There's supernatural preservation and productivity. I'll turn to you and make you fruitful and multiply you. And I'll confirm my covenant to you. And you'll eat old store long kept. You'll clear out the old and make way for the new. It's awesome. I mean, beautiful, just prosperity, plentifulness. God will dwell among you. This is, I think, the biggest part that I highlight the most. I will make my dwelling among you, and I will walk among you, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. I am the Lord your God, the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt, that you will not be their slaves. I have broken the bars of your yoke and made you walk erect. So these are descriptions of God's redemptive purposes being fulfilled. This gives us a glimpse of God's heart for the restoration of his relationship, yes, with Israel, but with humanity, that through Israel, this covenant would extend, these blessings would extend out to all of mankind. So when we read this, we see these blessings referenced often by later biblical prophets, later in history, that are describing the restoration of the world, the restoration of God's covenant to Israel, that then extends into transformation of the world, that the whole earth would experience these blessings. It's awesome. Honestly, it's kind of cool to look at these passages. And yes, I want to pray them for Israel, for the establishing of God's covenant with Israel, but I want to pray these things over my event, eventually over my community, over where I live as well. It's a beautiful thing to see. Then, punishment for disobedience. You can see it there at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to go ahead and scroll up, and we get into what happens if there's rebellion against the covenant. What is the feedback that is set up as discipline to call Israel and God's people back into right relationship and reconciliation? Now, I want to just mention, I don't know, some of these are kind of brutal, to be honest. They're not super, super friendly or nice. This is not like the, oh, happy, great, everything is awesome side of the covenant. This is really the choice of disobedience that leads to destruction. That, again, in a lot of ways, the covenant is meant to restore us from, restoring the consequence of sin. These are consequences of sin that produce destruction. And these are, as sin is allowed to escalate at the end of the age, this is some of the fruit of that sin that is produced among the nations. So I want you guys to see this, but some of it's particularly brutal. There are plagues of pain, wasting disease, and fever. There's absolute economic loss. and the loss of economic security of any kind. There's military vulnerability and dread, subjugation. I want to go to verse 17. I will set my face against you, and you will be struck down before your enemies. So now it's like the reversal of all the blessings that God pronounced in the earlier verses. I mean, this would be the loss of those things. Even though, if in spite of this you do not listen to me, then I will discipline you again sevenfold. So I've kind of broken this up in the outline of the notes. Let me just pull that up so you can see it. In the notes, I go ahead and show, will that scroll up? Where is it? I want to scroll it up for you. This is me having too many windows open. Here we go. That it's actually kind of broken up into sequences. I've listed them kind of as rounds of discipline. And if the first round or the first call goes ignored or unanswered, then the second call initiates, and there's a escalation through each sequence. And so that second round, you've got humiliation. I mean, the complete humiliation of all their pride. I will break the pride of your power. Let me pull back up the Bible so you can see in verse 19, I will break the pride of your power, and I will make your heavens like iron and the earth like bronze, talking primarily about just agricultural futility, infertility. Your strength will be spent in vain, for your land will not yield its increase, and the trees of the land will not yield their fruit. And then again, we get to the next round. Wild beasts attack children and livestock. There's population collapse. We get to the next round. The sword of vengeance, pestilence in the cities, captivity to invaders. Let's see, verse 25. I will bring the sword upon you and execute vengeance for the covenant. And if you gather within your cities, I'll send pestilence among you, deliver you into the hand of your enemies. I'll break your supply of your bread. 10 women will bake bread in a single oven and shall dole out your bread again by weight. And you shall eat and not be satisfied. And starts talking about famine. It's just a complete loss of population, of their land, their agriculture, their livestock. And then again, if you don't listen again, you get to the escalation of another round where the starvation becomes so intense that Moses literally starts to describe cannibalism. He describes high mortality. He describes the complete destruction of the idols that they put their trust in, the desolation of their land, the people scattered and hunted among the nations, the cities go uninhabited, the land is left idle and allowed to rest. This is an interesting one that I'm interested in people's thoughts on in the long term. But anyway, we're just kind of cruising through some of this as an overview. Not going to cover every verse, but as long as it lies desolate, it shall have rest. Talking about the land that Israel inherited. The rest that it did not have on your Sabbaths when you were dwelling in it. And for those of you who are left, I will send faintness into their hearts, in the hands of their enemies. Again, it's just, the call is again going unanswered and the alarm continues to escalate. But again, there are appeals for reconciliation. Now, if I scroll down, here we go. Verse 40. But, now hang on, there's hope. Moses doesn't leave this as just a hopeless thing. He says, but if they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers in their treachery that they committed against me and walking contrary to me, so I have walked contrary to them and brought them into the land of their enemies. But if then their uncircumcised heart is humbled and they make amends for their iniquity, then I will remember my covenant. Look at that, verse 42. I will remember my covenant with Jacob, and I will remember my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. He's saying, I will restore and renew that covenant. You can go back to answer the call, wake up from your slumber, and see the covenant restored, and move back into a period of those covenant blessings being experienced. And I mentioned in the notes, I'll go ahead and pull this up because this is pretty cool. Scrolling all the way down, Deuteronomy 4 gives a great just depiction of the prophesied response that when rebellion takes place and Israel begins to come under the discipline of the Lord, Moses actually does prophesy Israel's response, Israel's redemption, that it's not just hopeless and that they're not just left to the destruction of their rebellion, but that there is a response that's birthed in the heart of God's people. And this is how Moses describes it. I included it at the bottom of the notes for Leviticus 26, although it's a different chapter. It's Deuteronomy 4, starting in verse 29. But from there you will seek the Lord your God, and you will find him if you search after him with all of your heart and your soul. When you are in tribulation, all these things will come upon you in the latter days. You will return to the Lord your God and obey his voice. For the Lord your God is a merciful God, and he will not leave you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your fathers that he swore to them. See, there's still great hope. Great, great, great hope. Okay, we're going to switch to the next set of notes. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up the next chapter. I'm going to jump to Numbers. Let's see here. Numbers 23. Let's just go ahead and turn there. Numbers 23. I will put this on screen. That's why I'm pulling it up on the computer so that I can move us to there. And I'll see if I can show you the breakdown of the notes as well. Where are you? Let's go ahead and close that. I'm going to try to simplify my window so I can more easily get around. There we go. Okay. Numbers 23. All right. I'm going to try to move a little bit more quickly through Numbers. Very, very interesting, though, because Numbers really actually identifies some more specificity about God's plan God's redemptive plan for the world. And it comes kind of from an unlikely place, but again, it gets referenced a lot like what we just looked at in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 4. Those passages get referenced a lot later on by future prophets in Israel's history and even in the New Testament. So that's why I want to just set the foundation for that here in this first week, because you're going to recognize this language revisited a lot. And one of the characters that does get revisited is the prophet Balaam, who gives 7 oracles in Numbers 23 and 24. There's seven oracles of Balaam. Then I have given a little outline of them in the notes. So I want you to know, go grab that. I've got a little outline of them, trying to break it down a little bit and give a little bit of context for Balaam. What is going on in Numbers 23 and 24? And who is this Balaam guy? Well, that's a good question. And there's not actually a whole lot of detail about Balaam's identity or his background. Of course, we get a little bit of his lineage and that he's the son of Beor, whoever. Let's see. A little bit of just the, let's say, context of Numbers 22. Having defeated many of their adversaries, Israel has come to encamp in Moab. They're actually approaching the end of their wilderness time, and they're going to cross the Jordan River from Moab into the promised land. But first, they're encamped in Moab. And so they've come through, they've seen many of their adversaries. God has defeated their adversaries. They've come to Moab, and the king of Moab is Balak. Balak is the king of Moab. Balaam is the prophet. So Balak is really concerned. He sees Israel's been very victorious. He sees their adversaries have been destroyed, and here they have come into his land, and Balak is worried. And so he sought Balaam's help to cast a curse against Israel. In fact, in Numbers 22, Balak recognizes those who Balaam blesses are blessed, and those who Balaam curses are cursed. And so, like I said, there's not a whole lot known specifically about Balaam and his lineage. Like, he's not specifically Israelite. I don't know, I guess he's Moabite. It's odd, but he really does hear from God. Numbers 23 and 24 are very clear that God does speak to Balaam, even though sometimes Balaam turns to omens and divination and sorcery and some things like that, still has these conversations with God and records them in Numbers 23 and 24, which is what we're going to look at. But there is a problem with Balaam, and this problem is referenced a lot in future passages that we'll look at in later weeks. Balaam did hear from God, but Balaam was prone to some corruption and compromise. Specifically, you'll find it even in some of the texts we look at. Balaam gave into self-aggrandizement. Balaam's a pretty prideful guy and did not mind drawing attention to himself as the high and holy prophet of, the Most High God. And so he comes across a little bit full of himself, which we'll look at here in a moment. And he tolerated compromise for profit. One of the big examples, I'm right here. Let's see if I can pull it up. For instance, I'm trying to pull this up for you guys. One second. Oh, verse 12. Where are we at? 22, verse 12. I need to go quite a bit further up. Here we go. So Balak has asked Balaam to curse Israel. And Balaam says, all right, hang on. Let me listen. Let me go seek God and see what he says. And God tells him, you'll not go with them. You'll not curse the people, for they are blessed. And so Balaam turns around, and what he tells the princes of Balak is actually just half of the story. He just says, God won't let me go with you. He doesn't say, God won't let me curse them because God has blessed them. He just says, God won't let me go with you. Well, Balak's people go back, and then they bring even more noble people and even more wealth to offer to Balaam. And Balaam continues to kind of entertain the idea. He says, well, okay, hang on. Let me go see what I find out. And you just find him constantly being willing to entertain the idea because there's great wealth being offered. And he'll kind of walk the line, and he won't necessarily share the whole truth. And he really does ultimately give in to compromise. And that's what we see. I'm going to pull it up in the notes so you can see it. In 2 Peter, Peter identifies this when he's talking about false prophets later in his current day, talking about false teachers in the church who have followed the way of Balaam and who have loved the gain of wrongdoing. It means they've loved the profit of unrighteousness, that they've embraced compromise for profit. They've been allured away by greed, similarly to what happened to Balaam. And then Jude 11 references something similar. They abandoned themselves to compromise for the sake of gain to Balaam's error, which is again tolerating compromise for profit, like money, monetary gain, right? I'm going to get my profit words mixed up. All right, here we go. Let's jump back down to verse 23. I'm sorry, chapter 23. Did I just breeze right through it? Oh, yeah, there's 24. Cool. All right, so Balaam's first oracle. Balak, the king of Moab, brings Balaam to see the encampment of Israel and to pronounce a curse over them. And interesting what Balaam actually says. He says, how can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? And he goes on to talk about, wow, I mean, this is an amazingly blessed people. Balaam even says, let me die the death of these upright, of Israel. If I would die the death of them, obviously he's saying they're really prosperous. I want my end to be like theirs. I can't curse them because God's clearly blessed them. And I want to be a recipient of that same blessing. Balak is, of course, none too pleased about that. He says, hey, okay, you've pronounced a blessing when I asked you to pronounce a curse, but come over here to this other place. We will build more altars, sacrifice more animals, and see if you can curse them over here. And again, Balaam doesn't reject the offer. He says, well, okay, maybe I'll be able to curse them over here. Go figure. Second oracle. I'm going to scroll down. Again, I've tried to outline these pretty simply in the notes. But man, look at what happens in the second oracle. Balaam begins to give some detail about God's redemptive plan, his plan to fulfill his covenants with Israel. God is not a man that he should lie, or a son of man that he would change his mind. So Balaam is doubling down on the blessing. He said, will he not do it? He said it, will he not do it? Or has he spoken and he will not fulfill it? Behold, I have received a command to bless. He has blessed. I cannot revoke it. Okay, that sounds noble enough. Okay, it says God has not beheld misfortune in Jacob. Some translations say iniquity in Jacob. You could also say God has removed their iniquity. I think that might be a promise of the removal of Jacob's iniquity. But again, he's saying he's not beheld iniquity or wrongdoing or misfortune. Kind of is a word that can be translated several ways in Jacob, or seen trouble in Israel, which would be he's not found cause to abandon his covenant with Israel. He's not found cause to curse Israel for their destruction. God brings them out of Egypt as and is for them like the horns of a wild ox. For there is no enchantment against Jacob and no divination against Israel. Now it shall be said of Jacob and Israel, what has God wrought? Behold, a people as a lioness rises up, and a lion lifts itself. It does not lie down until it has devoured the prey and drunk the blood of the slain. Now here is Balaam saying this to a king who's afraid that Israel's going to destroy them. And essentially Balaam is saying, yes, they are going to devour their prey and they're going to just drink the blood of their slain. I mean, that's, Balaam is definitely giving Balak the opposite of the word that he wants. And I do love I'm just checking my notes. I do appreciate that there's no enchantment against Jacob, no divination that can overcome God's covenant with Israel. All right, I'm going to skip ahead because Balak is very unhappy. He says, I've offered you all this wealth. Why have you not cursed them? And you can see an example of Balaam kind of, again, bolstering his own pride. He's kind of self-aggrandizing himself. He's just kind of goes on about himself. The oracle of Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of a man whose eye is opened, the oracle of him who hears the words of God. He's just pontificating about himself, who sees a vision of the Almighty falling down with his eyes uncovered. How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your encampments, O Israel. He sees the prosperity, not just of what's in front of him, but the fulfillment of God's covenant with Israel. And he just starts to talk about the beauty of this fulfilled covenant after he's talked himself up quite a bit. But down in verse 7, let me move down. Water shall flow from his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted. Now, this is interesting. Balaam starts to isolate the covenant down to a ruler, an individual who would become a messianic figure or future king. His king shall be higher than Agag, again, an exalted king with an exalted kingdom. God brings him, starts to talk about this individual out of Egypt. Let me go ahead and scroll this down. And is for him like the horns of a wild ox. He will eat up the nations, his adversaries, and shall break their bones in pieces, and pierce them through with his arrows. He crouched, he lay down like a lion, like a lioness, who will rouse him up. Blessed are those who bless you, talking about that messianic figure, and cursed are those who curse you. Now, previously, there's not been a whole lot of mention of one specific messianic figure, but Balaam sees it. He sees into the future of the fulfillment of the covenant, talking about the beauty of the fulfilled covenant, and he sees a king, a future king of Israel, who is a messianic figure, an individual, not just the nation as a people, but an individual that Balaam is prophesying about. This is one of the earliest prophecies, not just of an eventual theoretical messianic age that is just a environment of covenant fulfillment, but a person that will be the instrument of the fulfillment of the covenant. That's interesting. Balaam's getting more specific. This is one of the first times we see that distillation down to a person who will be an instrument of the fulfillment of God's covenant in all these promises. I think that's really fascinating. All right. Balak's anger is obviously kindled. Let's go ahead and go down to in my heading in my Bible says this is the ESV version. It says the final oracle. The final oracle is really three more oracles. The fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh. Four more, but they are kind of quick. They go kind of quickly, and I've included them in the notes. You can see them there. Oh, let's see. Balaam's oracle again. Balaam, the son of Beor, the oracle of a man whose eyes are opened. Oh gosh, Balaam's going at it again. But verse 17. Oh no, wait, that's the one I already talked about. Sorry. Wait, no, is it? Oh no, this is another one. Sorry, this is the next oracle. I totally got lost in my notes. Balaam says, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob. He's doubling down on the messianic figure. A star will come out of Jacob. A scepter will rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab. At this point, Balaam is just unleashing this prophetic word against Moab while he's got the king of Moab in front of him. He will crush the forehead. Now, does that sound like familiar language? Going all the way back to Genesis 3, we talked about the crushing of the skull. Here it is again. He will crush the forehead of Moab and break down the sons of Sheth. Now, the sons of Sheth, I was reading a lot of commentaries about the identity of the sons of Sheth, and it essentially is a parallelism for Moab. It's, again, the people of Moab, because this is what happens again in the next verse. Edom will be dispossessed. Seir also. Now, Edom and Seir are kind of two titles for the same tribe, the same group of people. Edom will be dispossessed. Seir also, his enemies, shall be dispossessed. Israel is doing valiantly. He sees again Israel having this military victory against their enemies. And one from Jacob shall exercise dominion and destroy the survivors of cities. Again, that messianic figure talking about that. Fascinating. The fifth, sixth, and seventh oracle go on about some other tribes that he's referencing. We could come back to maybe a little bit of discussion about the ships from Kittim. We'll go ahead and save that for the discussion group. I'm going to go ahead and skip out of that. I've got the rest of those in the notes if you want to look more about that. The notes, here we go. Numbers 24. Scroll down. Oh, down more. There we go. The fifth oracle, sixth oracle, and seventh oracle. You can take a little bit more of a look at those there. I'm going to jump quickly to Deuteronomy 28. Here we go. We're going to move through Deuteronomy 28 kind of quickly. In fact, I'm just going to show you the notes real quick because I am super running out of time. Not that my stream is about to run out of time, but I am about to run out of time. Moses in Deuteronomy 28 is, again, later on now, as Moses is kind of approaching the end of his life, and he is renewing the covenant again with Israel, and he describes very similar to Leviticus 26, the cup of God's blessing and the cup of God's wrath. What it looks like to experience covenant fulfillment and the redemption of the world, and what it looks like to experience the opposite, the consequences of rebellion, the consequences of sin. And they're very, very similar to Leviticus 26, which we already looked at. And you can kind of see I've broken it down in the notes. How do I say? International leadership and prominence. The language of it is so cool. I hate to not bring it up. Let me just pull it up real quick because we can get through it pretty quickly. If I can type. It's awesome. I'm actually going to pull up my highlights so that you can kind of see. I have marked these up quite a bit, but it's beautiful. Starting in verse 3, blessed will you be in the city, blessed will you be in the field, blessed will be the fruit of your womb, the fruit of the ground, and the fruit of your cattle, and increasing your herds, the young of your flock. Blessed will be your basket, your kneading bowl. Blessed will you be when you come in, blessed will you be when you go out. You can kind of see, it's awesome, awesome blessing that we can pray over Israel, absolutely, but that through Israel, as the covenant is extended, that we can pray this over the whole earth. I love it. The Lord will command blessing for you, your barns, and all that you undertake. The Lord will establish you as a people holy to himself, as he's sworn to you. If you keep his commandments, the Lord your God walk in his ways. All the peoples of the earth will see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. There's another prophetic word by another Hebrew prophet we'll get to later that says, they will be afraid of all the good things that I will do for you. Oh, it's so amazing. And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity, the fruit of your womb, the fruit of your livestock, and the fruit of your ground. Again, you're kind of seeing that recurring theme with the land that he swore to your fathers to give you. Oh, yeah, that's good. And the Lord will make you the head and not the tail, that you shall only go up and not down, if you obey the commandments of the Lord. I love it. I love it. I love it. Beautiful, beautiful language. Let's jump back to the notes. Scroll down. The discipline for disobedience, discipline for broken covenant. Similar language. I know that's really small text for you to see on the stream, but I just wanted you to know you can go get these notes, and I've got these things broken down. And what's interesting is there's kind of two columns. On the left-hand column are kind of all the verses that reference a particular discipline. And on the right is the description of the discipline. So you can see if you squint or if you try to zoom in on the stream, it says categorical curse is at the very top. And then I've listed all the places that are just a categorical curse, meaning like God's basically saying, I will withstand anything you do. So there's two references to population collapse and mass death. There's two references to agricultural collapse. So I try to categorize them and kind of break them down. And you can see the most references for military defeat and captivity. Verse after verse after verse after verse reference military defeat and captivity. Verse 25, verse 32, verse 36, verse 41, 48, and 63 and 64 really is a big highlight. There's also international embarrassment, mass death, plagues and boils. He says, I will revisit the plagues of Egypt will be revisited upon you. That's terrifying. Anyway, you can see those there. This is, again, the discipline for the broken covenant, and it's very similar language to what we talked about in Leviticus 26. So I'm going to jump ahead. Do we have time for Deuteronomy 29? Let me take a look. I could just give you the summary. Oh, yeah. Something that's cool about Deuteronomy 29. Let me go ahead and see if I can pull this up. I just want to point out maybe one real specific thing. Deuteronomy 29. Yep. Don't worry. I'm going to bring it up on stream here in a second. He's calling Israel to renew the covenant again. They're going through a renewal of the covenant in Moab. And bring back up the Bible. Now I'm in Deuteronomy 29. He summons all of Israel, and he's reading the law, and he is declaring all the great things that God has done. You have seen the Lord do before your eyes in Egypt to Pharaoh and his servants and all his land, and all the great trials that your eyes have seen, the signs and great wonders. And one of the things that he references is divine preservation. And we see this theme revisited in future prophecies, that when Israel is going through trial, that there actually still is, as they come out of the trial and into redemption, that they do experience supernatural preservation. There actually is preservation even in the midst of the trial. Your clothes that you've worn have not worn out, and your sandals have not worn off your feet. Think about that. Israel has to endure 40 years in the wilderness, and despite having the manna and water flowing from rocks and great things that we read about in those chapters, but he says, even your clothes have been preserved. You would have thought that would have all worn out, but he said, God even gave preservation to your clothes and to your sandals. And he says, therefore, keep these words of the covenant, and leads them through that, so that you may enter into the sworn covenant of the Lord, which he's making with you today, established with you today as his people, that he may be your God as he's promised you. And he says, this is a invitation to enter into the covenant that's not just extending to us today as we stand here at Moab in this generation, but it goes on to whoever is not with us here today. And that whoever is not with us here today, commentators interpret it to mean both. Somebody who might not be present, who's alive at the time, but might not be present at that assembly. But no, he's talking about also generations that are unborn. It's not just limited to those who are living there today, but he says this invitation of Deuteronomy 28 and 29 and 32 are extended into future generations who who will experience an even greater fulfillment of this. So I love that. There's a little reference to those who are not here with us. He's actually talking about us. He's talking about modern day Israel. He's talking about us. I love it. All right. I'm going to skip that part. We can look more at that in notes, or we'll look more at that in the discussion group. Repentance and forgiveness. Let's see. Do we have time for Deuteronomy 23? I think what I want to just jump to, because we are running out of time quickly, is Deuteronomy 32. I've got to bring this home. I'll probably revisit some more of these in the discussion group at the very end, but I'm trying to keep this to an hour of the stream. So let's just get to Deuteronomy 32 real quick. What's interesting is that in Deuteronomy 31, just as a little, this is what I want to mention about Deuteronomy 32. In Deuteronomy 31, Moses is convinced, he's very sure that Israel is going to face times when they experience future rebellion in future generations. Even though they're here at Moab, they're about to go into the promised land. They are presently renewing their covenant. They're about to go into the land. The wilderness season is about to end. It is like things are going up. And Moses still in Deuteronomy 31 says, I am convinced, I have seen a future where Israel still will rebel against the covenant. And so I'm going to write this song and I'm going to record it in Deuteronomy 32. Deuteronomy 32 is the song of Moses. He says, I'm going to write this song and you're going to have to keep this song and give it to Israel when they are experiencing discipline, when they have rebelled against the covenant and they're experiencing discipline. This song will be a song of remembrance and a call to repentance and a promise of restoration. So I've got a little bit of an outline of the song there. It's fascinating. I would just love to spend an hour going through that, but we're running out of time. So as much as I love it, there's a couple things I want to point out. In fact, let me make sure. A couple of verses. Oh, where's it at? I might actually have it highlighted. Jumping down to 32. Bear with me for a second because there's just one or two points I want to really hit with this. Oh, yeah. Okay. Good. Okay, I found it. I'm going to pull up the Bible again. Boop, there it is. So the basic outline is that Moses is recalling the marvelous works of God, calling Israel to remember the great things God has done, how great God is, yay. But even though God has done these great things, in that prosperity, Jeshurun has grown fat. That's another name for Israel. Jeshurun is the Israelites that Moses is referencing. He grew fat and he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. Essentially, Israel enters into rebellion. Even though they experience the fulfillment, in the future, they do rebel. And again, saying this from the perspective of the time of Moses, he sees forward prophetically into a season of Israel's rebellion and sees that they're going to become vulnerable, that they're going to experience God's discipline and they're going to become vulnerable, and their adversaries will begin to consume them. The adversaries will begin to exploit their vulnerability. So this is kind of the sequence of the song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32 is God blesses Israel. He makes a covenant with them. And even though Israel experiences that blessing, there comes a season when Israel does rebel against the covenant. They experience the discipline of rebelling against the covenant, the consequences of sin. They become vulnerable, and their adversaries begin to exploit that vulnerability unjustly and unfairly, specifically with the expressed purpose of consuming Israel. And here God has had to withstand Israel. Their vulnerability is because they've stepped out of the covenant, and their adversaries are trying to take advantage of that. So moving down, just summarizing a whole lot of these passages. Down, 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 down. That's definitely not the most uplifting part of the song. But then he says, "Is it not laid up in store with me, sealed in my treasures? Vengeance is mine and recompense. For the time when their foot shall slip, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and their doom will come swiftly." Moses is speaking God's response. This is God's response to those nations who have tried to exploit Israel's vulnerability and tried to come and consume Israel in their covenant rebellion. God says, "Vengeance is mine, recompense is mine, for the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees that their power is gone and that there's none remaining, bond or free. Then he will say, where are their gods, the rock with whom you took refuge, who ate the fat of their sacrifices?" Da, 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 da. He's kind of blending a little bit of language, referring to Israel, but really he's referring to the destruction of Israel's adversaries. Because look, this is his message to Israel. He says, "See, now I am he. Even I am he. There's no God beside me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. There's none that can deliver out of my hand. For I lift up my hand to heaven. As I swear, I live forever. If I sharpen my flashing sword, and my hand shall take hold on judgment. I will take vengeance on my adversaries, and I will repay those who hate me. I will make my arrows drunk with the blood of my enemies." That's brutal language, but he's talking about God is going to be Israel's deliverer. When Israel is surrounded by adversaries who are trying to exploit them in their vulnerability, God says, "I am he. I am going to be your deliverer. I am the one." Now, this is interesting because Balaam has said there is going to be the concentration of the messianic, there's going to be a messianic figure who's going to be the instrument of restoring God's covenant with Israel. And here God is saying, I'm going to be that messianic figure. That's interesting foreshadowing for what we'll look at later on. But basically saying, "I will be your deliverer. Rejoice with him, O heavens. Bow down, all gods, for he avenges the blood of his children." It's the children of the covenant, and takes vengeance on his adversaries. He repays those who hate him and cleanses his people's land. And then look at what Moses says. This is huge. At the end of the song, he's finished the song. He's told them, keep the song, even store it next to the Ark of the Covenant. "Take heart, all the words by which I am warning you today, that you may command them to your children, that they may be careful to do all the words in this law." Again, we're just looking at this. This has been this continuous kind of conversation from 28 to 32. "For it is not empty words for you, but your very life. By this word, you shall live long in the land that you're going over the Jordan to possess." Interesting. I mean, he's literally saying this section right here of what we've just talked about and what we've documented, even in this song, is critical to your prophetic destiny and the fulfillment of God's covenant with Israel. Super important. That's why we've got to start with it here in week 1. That's Deuteronomy 28 through 32, and really poor justice compared to the full depth of what's there. But just for the purposes of our stream and for this overview, that's all we've got time for right now. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to transition to the discussion group here in a moment, but I just want to remind you, if you feel like I went too quickly over some things, maybe I didn't cover some things well enough, I totally understand. I feel the same way, but that's a big reason why the notes are there. And I'm sure that in future weeks, we'll have opportunity to kind of come back and revisit this, even as we're moving on through. But it's been about an hour. So I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who's been on the stream and who's been watching. If you do see this or you see the recording, please leave a comment. Like, let me know you were here. I can see like that there's a viewer, but I can't see who they are. So leave a comment, say hi. I'd love to know who's here. And I'm going to move over to the discussion group that I have at the end of this. And if you want to join the discussion group, it's in the Servant Leader Network app for our partners, our ministry partners. And so if you're part of that group, then please jump over there, join the discussion group with me. And if you want to join that group, you might not be able to join that this week, which is totally fine. But if you want to join in future weeks, mark your calendar for Fridays at 11 a.m. Central Time. And let me know. Reach out to me or go to my website. You can join, sign up to be part of our ministry partners. There's no donation necessary. And you can be added to the discussion group. And part of what I'm so excited about with that is that we have a lot to talk about. I mean, we have a lot to talk about in the discussion group where we're going to talk about what we see in the passage. We're going to ask questions, talk about what stands out to us, where we see this being fulfilled in our day, and how we see this unfolding in the future as well. So again, huge thank you also to all of our ministry partners who make all this possible. Your prayers and support make all of these streams and all this content possible. You can find a lot more free content and how to partner with us on our website and in the Servant Leader Network app, all available for free. So as we jump over to the discussion group, if you want to join that group, again, please just reach out to me or check out our website. There's no donation required, and you can mark your calendar for every Friday at 11 a.m. Central, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching. So appreciate you. And let's see if my stream button works.